Hey y'all, my name is Mitch Petrie, and welcome back to another episode of Petrie Productions. Last video, we talked about conference realignment in college football, and today we're going to talk about something arguably more impactful to the sport, the introduction of name, image, and likeness. Name, image, and likeness, or NIL for short, just refers to a college athlete's ability to make money off of those three things: their name, their image, and their likeness. Whether it be jersey sales or endorsement deals, it allows college football players to use their fame to make money. NIL has been a long debated topic in college sports, often stemming from whether or not college athletes should even be paid in the first place. You can take a look at the NCAA's long history of punishing teams for recruiting violations, most of which would now be allowed under the modern NIL regulations. The most famous example of this is perhaps the death penalty levied against Southern Methodist University in 1987 for a multitude of recruiting violations, most famously of which was Eric Dickerson's sudden flip from Texas A&M to SMU. At the time, it was an unspoken fact that Southwestern Conference schools were illegally paying players to come attend their schools through slush funds, which would now be called modern-day NIL collectives. Eric Dickerson was one of the nation's top running back prospects and committed to Texas A&M University. Around the same time, Dickerson was spotted driving a gold 1977 Pontiac Trans Am, suspected to be a gift from A&M boosters and infamously dubbed the Trans A&M. He shockingly decommitted from Texas A&M and attended SMU, and nobody, from Dickerson to the boosters to the faculty, would ever really say how Dickerson ended up getting there. In 1987, the NCAA canceled the SMU season and banned them from bowl games and nationally televised games for 2 seasons until 1989, and revoked 55 scholarships from the team across 4 years. Something which SMU never really recovered from. The punishment was so harsh that it became known as the death penalty. Former UF President John Lombardi said, "It's like what happened after we dropped the atom bomb in World War II. The results were so catastrophic, we'll do anything to avoid dropping another one." Even in more recent times, Reggie Bush had his Heisman revoked from him in 2010 after it was discovered through an NCAA probe that during his time at USC, he received cash gifts and a car. He fought for nearly a decade to get it back, and earlier this year, he was awarded his Heisman back. But it was taken away for 2 things that are now pretty common and would definitely be allowed in today's space of NIL. What really brought all this forefront to light was in 2009 when Ed O'Bannon, a former UCLA basketball player, decided to sue the NCAA and EA Sports over them illegally using his name, image, and likeness in their video games. The district court agreed that student athletes that did not receive compensation for their likeness was a violation of Section 1 of the Sherman Antitrust Act. Eventually, the Ninth Circuit Court oversaw the case and reaffirmed the lower court's decision, and as a result, EA stopped producing their NCAA video games in 2014, until this year, with the return of College Football 25. In 2019, California passed the Fair Pay to Play Act, becoming the first state to pass any NIL legislation. Scheduled to go into effect in the year of 2023, the bill barred the NCAA or any schools from punishing student athletes that earned NIL compensation. Many other states quickly followed suit in 2020, including Colorado, Florida, Nebraska, and Jersey, just to name a few. At the time of recording this video, 32 states have passed the current legislation surrounding NIL. In the years following the O'Bannon lawsuit, a flurry of legal challenges were brought against the NCAA regarding compensation for student athletes. Many of these lawsuits were combined to form the NCAA v. Alston, which argued that prohibiting non-cash related benefits for student athletes was a violation of antitrust laws. The lower courts agreed with Alston and ruled in their favor. The NCAA kept filing appeals until the case was eventually heard by the Supreme Court in 2021. The Supreme Court upheld the lower court's verdict in a unanimous decision and thus opened the door for the modern-day NIL we see. The aftermath left the NCAA scrambling, and as a result, Mark Emmert, the president of the NCAA, announced that athletes would be able to profit off their NIL rights for the first time. A year later, the NCAA issued, quote, NIL guidelines to its member schools, but little to no concrete rules or restrictions have actually been passed, which brings us to today. NIL is still very much in its Wild West era. Massive booster-funded NIL collectives are reminiscent of old-time bagmen and slush funds. You have players transferring left and right on promises of grand paychecks, and even have mid-season opt-outs when those promises aren't upheld. And take a look at former UNLV quarterback Matthew Sluka. Sluka led the Rebels to a 4-0 start and looked to be building a hopeful run to the college football playoffs, until he opted out for the rest of the season. Why, you might ask? Well, it's because when he transferred from Holy Cross University earlier this season to UNLV, he was promised a payout by the NIL collective of $100,000 from an assistant coach. Him and his agent claimed he never received that money, and as a result, he felt it was the best decision for him to sit out for the rest of the season. You can even look at NIL as being the reason why great coaches like Nick Saban have retired. All this to say that NIL is still very much in its toddler phase. It's been around for a few years, but the future is moldable. But without some strict rules, regulations, and guidelines, things could go off the rails, and they could go off the rails pretty quickly. What are your thoughts on NIL? What should the NCAA do to proceed? Like, where do we move on from here? These are all questions that I don't have the answer to, and I'd love to hear some feedback from you guys. Thank you so much for watching today's episode of Petrie Productions. My name is Mitch Petrie, and I'll see you next time.